Well, hey guys, and welcome to the show. Today we have Pioneer's AVH 2550 NEX Android Auto and Apple CarPlay radio. So let's open it up and take a look and see what comes inside. So one of the first things in the box is going to be the handheld remote. Now, in case you're wondering, one of the big differences between a 2500 and a 2550 is this remote. The 2500 doesn't come with this. You have your USB extension cable. This is about 5 feet long. It has male on one end and female on the other. The main power plug, which we'll go over in a minute. Your microphone for talking. We used to call it the Bluetooth microphone, but now since it has CarPlay and Android Auto as well as Bluetooth, this is the microphone you're going to use. Comes with a bag of screws, the warranty card, a quick start guide, and the installation manual. Now let's talk about the harness real quick and go over what's going on here. And now in most modern car stereos, they're going to be more or less all the same colors. There are subtle variations, so let's go over them. First off, you're going to have these 8 speaker wires here. And how they break out is you have a solid color and a solid with a black stripe. The black stripe is negative. White is going to be the driver's front, gray is going to be the passenger front, green is going to be the driver's rear, and purple is going to be the passenger rear. Next up, you have a blue wire with a white stripe. That's going to be a remote turn on to turn on either an amplified antenna, an amplifier itself, or anything else that needs to turn on and off with the radio. You have a yellow black wire. This is the cell phone mute wire. Really all this is used for is if you have a car like a GM that has OnStar and you're still using that and you want the radio to mute instead of shut off, you would use this. It has a light green wire. This is the emergency brake wire. Now what this needs to see is a on, off, on ground pulse every time the ignition is turned on and off. It resets itself. Red is your accessory power, yellow is constant 12 volts, black is ground, orange white is illumination. Basically what that'll do is when it gets a 12 volt in, it will dim the face of the radio. It's not variable, meaning if you have a roller switch on your dash, that's not going to control this radio, it's just one setting. Last but not least, we have the purple white wire. This is the backup camera trigger. This needs to see a 12 volts. When the car is put in reverse, it will activate the input for the camera on the screen. Now let's go ahead and pull this thing out and take a look at the back. Now starting on the passenger side of the radio, we have the one and only USB input. It's a 5 volt 1.5 amp. Next to that is the aux input. Now this is a full AV input, meaning it will do video through the aux input. You have the main power plug input. You have your iData data connection. Now depending on the situation where this is going to be used, you may need to use this. For example, if your car has backup sensors, you're going to need to use this for the iData connection. You have your microphone input, you have your wired remote input, Sirius XM input. For Sirius XM, you'll need the SVX 300 add-on tuner. On the driver's side, you have your preamp output. Now this unit has 4 volts of preamp output, starting on the bottom with the subwoofer, the rear, and the front. The brown input over here is for your backup camera. The yellow input is for an add-on navigation system. Your antenna will be plugged in here. Your AV input. So technically this has 2 AV inputs, either via the aux input here or this dedicated AV input here. You have video in as well as audio in. And then you also have video out. Now something to note on this particular radio, the AV input, these 3 here, can also be used as a front camera input. When you select that, it will shut off these inputs and just use the video input for front camera. Now let's flip it over and take a look at the front. When the radio first powers up, you're going to be asked what language you'd like it to be set up for. It has 5 to choose from: English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Chinese. Pick the one you like and select next. Then it's going to ask you if you'd like network or standard mode. Now this has to do with the output of the radio's preamp section and the RCAs. Network mode turns this radio into a 3-way active setup. And what I mean by that is you have the front output is for tweeter, the rear output is for mid-range, and then the subwoofer RCA is for subwoofer. Both the RCA output and the wire will be set up this way. Now when you do this, this is going to move the Bluetooth or phone output, meaning when someone is talking to you, into channels 3 and 4, which is your mid-range output, which we'll talk about in a little bit once we get to the EQ settings. We'll show you both. Standard is what most people are going to do, and that's why it's highlighted. What this is for is if you're going to do front, front, rear, and sub. Channels 1 and 2, both powered and RCA, would be for a front speaker. It doesn't matter if it's a coaxial or component. Your rear output, which is 3 and 4, and of course the sub. Pick the one you'd like and select OK. Now these two options are only available when the radio is first powered up. If you need to get back to switch it, you can go through restore settings, which is what we're going to do at the very end of the video. So if you need that, just fast forward to the end of the video. Then it's going to come up with this warning here. Now this is going to stay up for 6 seconds and then automatically go away. If you do put the car into reverse, it will bypass that, or if you hit the OK if you're in a hurry. That's going to bring you to this home page. Now a lot of you guys might have the older radio, either 23 or 24, and be wondering, well, what's the difference? So we'll go ahead and get those out of the way real quick. First off, you have a new, smaller screen. On the previous generation of this radio, it had a 7-inch motorized unit. It no longer has that. It has a 6.8-inch slot load CD player here across the top. Your buttons are down the side, similar to the 15 or 1400, which has a 6.2-inch screen. The reason why this has 6.8 is so that you can do Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. They have a minimum screen size, and this covers it. If you have one of the older radios, you'll notice that this looks a little bit different. This is going to be your second difference. You have a new home page, and this is customizable. You can adjust where you want these to be. If you go into gears, your color palette, you have this new home custom setting. Tap that. You can shrink this down. You can pull it across. You can make it one level. You can switch things around by tapping here. So it gives you a little bit more layout options. And since we're in the color palette setup, we'll go ahead and select backgrounds. You have a new background that is available to you. This is typically where Pioneer does every year, is they give you a new background in this slot here. They still have the same other backgrounds that they've had previously. And of course you can import your own background or shut the background off if you don't want. You can also have different backgrounds, still images, for the home screen as well as your AV source. If we select illumination, that's for these buttons over here. We can go ahead and make them one of the 5 preset colors. We can make them variable, or we can pick a color of our own. Themes are going to be the colors for this background, so we can change those, as well as you can also change the layout of the clock. The last difference in this radio is something that the radios had in the past and they brought back. Now if you got a 2400, you may or may not have had this feature built into it depending on when it was released. If you go back into your main menu, select the tools and scroll down to camera, parking assist guidelines have been reintroduced to the radio. They are a little bit different. You can still drag them around. And of course you have the arrows at the top for fine tuning depending on whatever box you're adjusting. And those are the differences. Now let's get on to talking about the rest of the features. As we said, this has a 6.8-inch touchscreen. It has a 16:9 aspect ratio. It has a clear resistive screen that is 800 by 480 LED backlit TFT active matrix. Starting with your buttons here on the driver's side, you have a push to talk feature. You have your volume up and down. You have your main home button. Now the main home button also doubles as power off. Press and hold it, it will shut down the radio. You have your display off button. What this does is this just shuts the display off and allows CarPlay and Android Auto and Bluetooth calls to still function. This is helpful if you're driving at nighttime and the display is too bright. And then you have on the bottom here your function interaction page. This is kind of a holdover for the web link feature that these have, so that you can access track up and down and stuff like that when you're using web link. Now when you're on the standard home page, if you click this drop down arrow here, this is going to bring up your main source list. The 2550 has HD radio, Bluetooth streaming audio. Now the nice thing about the Bluetooth streaming audio is this uses dual phone pair mode. If you'll notice over here, this icon is for 2 phones. So what this allows you to do is if you're not using CarPlay or Android Auto, you're just streaming over Bluetooth, you can have 2 phones paired to it and switch between those 2 phones to listen to the music you want. So if the passenger of the car has a better song and you want to listen to that, you can select that. Now also in Bluetooth phone mode, if you have those 2 phones paired to it at the same time, it will ring either phone through to the radio. It doesn't matter which one you're listening to via music. Pandora and Spotify are both apps that you can control for the phone. However, if you're an Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, those apps are also built into that. You can use the USB to control an iPod if you want, instead of plugging in a phone. Your auxiliary input is located here. Camera view allows you to access the camera. Now if you go into settings, go to your tools and go to input output settings, you'll notice over here it says AV input and it's off. Tap on that. It's going to give you source, camera, or off. If you select camera, what this is going to allow you to do is use that input like we said earlier for a front camera. If you select source, then it'll give you an AV in the drop down menu as a source. Now if you've picked it as a camera, when you go to camera view, you'll notice now there's a 1 and 2 in the corner. If you tap those, that's going to switch between front camera and rear camera. Now also on the top of the screen, you'll notice this little stopwatch icon here and this X icon here. If you tap this, it's going to take you back to your main radio and it's going to stay this way until you stop touching the screen. 10 seconds after the last finger press, it's going to revert back to this. Tap it again, do what you need, and then it'll switch back to the camera. Now if you're over this and you don't need this as a feature anymore, that's what the X is for. Source off and power off, they're just like these buttons over here. They're redundant. If you select source off, it's just going to shut the radio down and allow you to get Bluetooth, CarPlay, and Android Auto functions over the phone. Power off is actually going to shut the radio down. So if you need the radio powered off for any particular reason, this is how you do it. And when you're done, hit a button and it'll wake back up. One of the cool features about Pioneer is this guy right here, the clock. Simply tap it and you can get in to adjust it. So twice a year when you need to redo this, it's simple enough. Now along with having a 4-volt preamp section like we talked about, it also has 22 watts times 4 of internal power. Now this one is also a CD DVD player that will go in here, and you can also play movies over the USB. One of the nice features about this radio is that you can use a thumb drive with a 1080 video and it will down-res it to fit the screen resolution. You no longer need to worry about what screen resolution you're using. Now you'll notice the phone button down here in the corner. If you're not in Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, if you tap this, it'll take you to the internal Bluetooth. And since we've been talking about Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, let's take a look real quick. So if you hit the home icon, it'll be located over here. Go ahead and tap it, and this will take you to Apple CarPlay. And as we said, both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, if you hit this, it'll go ahead and launch the push to talk feature in those apps. And for Android Auto, it's going to be located in the same spot. Go ahead and tap that, and it'll bring up your Android Auto homepage. Now in both of these services, you have your navigation located. They'll both do Google Maps, Waze, and on the iPhone, they'll do Apple Maps as well. Next, let's go in and take a look at some of the settings. Hit the gear, hit the speaker. This is going to take you to the internal EQ. Now this has stayed pretty much the same for the last couple years, but we'll go over the features just to refresh, and or if you've never seen them before. Tap the EQ icon here, and it's going to take you to the 13-band global EQ Pioneer uses. Tap the screen again, you can go in and adjust it. You have 2 presets of your own, as well as 5 built-in presets: super bass, powerful, natural, vocal, and of course flat. Now if you're on a source, if you'll notice over here it says EQ. If you tap it, it'll quickly take you to the EQ settings so that you can adjust, and then hit X and it'll take you back to your source. Next up is balance and fader, mute, attenuation, or off. Now how you access that is if you simply hit the volume up or down. You'll notice right here, go ahead and tap it, and it's set for mute right now. Tap it again, and you'll go back to your previous volume. Source level adjust, since we're on FM, it's grayed out. FM is used as the main source control. If we select another source, you'll see it's highlighted now. If we come in here, and we can turn up or turn down from there. So if you're using a phone and when you're switching between FM and phone and the phone seems quieter, you can gain it up. If the phone seems too loud, you can turn it down. Subwoofer on and off. In this case, the subwoofer's default is off. So if you turn it on and you're all excited, like, yeah, we're gonna hear some bass, and you hear none, have no fear. Simply go into here and turn it on. Speaker level. This has 5 channels of level control. And what that's used for is when you're doing time correction and or subwoofer level control here. If you select where you're sitting in the car, you'll notice it automatically autos adjusts. Now you can go back in and turn these down or turn these up to suit your needs. Crossover. You can turn on and off the front, you can turn on and off the rear, and you can turn on and off the subwoofer. You can also drag them and adjust the slope. It has a 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, and 36 dB slope on the subwoofer. The front has 6, 12, 18, 24 dB slope, both front and rear. Now the frequencies that you can choose from on all channels are 25, 31.5, 40, 50, 63, 80, 100, 120, 125, 160, 200, and 250. You can access those simply by sliding this across the radio. Subwoofer settings allows you quick access specifically to your subwoofer. You can also switch the phase of the subwoofer simply by tapping this. Listening position is a redundant of where we were at when we were in the level control. You can turn it off. You can dedicate it towards the front, the passenger, or the driver depending on where you live, or all seats. Time alignment. This is the feature that's being adjusted when you're picking that seat that you want to sit in. So there again, we can pick the front left, and what it's done is it's gone ahead and added in the inches. It thinks your head is away from the speaker. You can simply adjust these up and down if you use a tape measure to measure them and make it more accurate. Auto EQ and EQ memory. This has an auto EQ feature. If you buy Pioneer's dedicated microphone, you can plug into the aux input on the radio and do auto EQ settings. After you've gone ahead and adjusted all these settings and made your radio sound amazing, come down here to Save Settings. This will automatically go ahead and store all that work you've done. And then if you lose it, you can come down to Load Settings and that'll bring them back. Bass Boost is something that the radio has in it to restore some of the lower end to music that might not necessarily have bass, like classic rock. Rear speaker output. This is grayed out right now because the radio is on. If you switch it to standby, you can turn on and off your rear speakers. Loudness control. This has 3-step loudness control. Loudness control is very helpful if you listen to the music at low volumes. It'll go ahead and boost the bass and treble, but then roll them off as you turn up the volume so you don't distort or blow any of the speakers. Automatic level control, off mode 1 and mode 2. This is if you're listening to, let's say, media on a thumb drive or an iPod or something along those lines, and the levels are all different. This will go ahead and look at it and try to make them all play about the same. Sound retriever is there for the recorded media to try to make it sound more lifelike and vivid. Default is mode 1, you have mode 2, and you have off. Now, as we said, this will do network mode. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and select network mode. Now we want to go back into our EQ, scroll down to speaker level. And if you'll notice, the graphics have changed a little bit. Now we have nothing located in the rear because network mode provides no output whatsoever for rear speakers. It is strictly going to be the highs, tweeter, mid-range, front only, and subwoofer. Here we could control the individual levels for each one of those speakers. If we select where we're sitting in the car, there again, it'll go ahead and reduce the volume for those sides. If we come into the crossover, now we have high, mid-low pass, mid-high pass, because now it's created a band pass channel for the mid-range. So we have the bottom of the tweeter, the top of the mid-range, the bottom of the mid-range, and then the top of the subwoofer. And as you can see here, this is the tweeter crossover here. We can adjust that simply by dragging that up and down. There again, we can also adjust the slope to 24 dB. Go back. Now we can adjust the top of the mid-range, meaning how high of a frequency is it going to play. We can adjust the bottom of the mid-range. That's how low it's going to play. And of course the subwoofer. And then in time alignment, it's going to allow us to time align that tweeter, that mid-range, and the same on the other side, and of course the subwoofer. And like I said, there's no rear output, and also the Bluetooth sound for talk is going to come out of these mid-range now because they're on the rear channel. That's where it gets kind of weird. Now, a couple other things just to note: when you're in the settings, you go to gears, you have your beep tone on and off, so if you don't want to hear the beep every time you press a button, you can turn that off. If you're not going to be using the auxiliary input, here again, you can shut that off. If the demo mode is driving you crazy, here's where it's at. Your camera settings are here also. You can turn the backup camera on and off, as well as adjust the parking lines. You can change the system language in case it's wrong. You can switch driver's position. So if you want the toolbar for CarPlay to be on the passenger side or the driver's side, depending on where you're at, you can select that here. Your picture adjustment is here, so this allows you to go in and adjust the screen. System information is going to be where your firmware information is located. So if there's ever an update, this is the number you're going to want to look at. And then last but not least, If you come up here to where it says restore settings, this is the guy we were waiting for. If you tap all settings, it's gonna go ahead and ask you, do you want to restore it? Now what this is gonna do is this is gonna take this radio and bomb it back to out of the box settings. So there's gonna be nothing that was on it before is gonna be on this radio. It's gonna be a clean slate. What we like to do is save it for last because we've had a bunch of stuff. We have no idea what we've done. This will bring it right back to brand new. All right guys, this has been the AVH 2550 NEX Pioneer Radio. Fernando?
Okay guys, if you like this video, please subscribe, share, like, you know where you find us. Facebook, Instagram, and here in YouTube.
You guys have a nice night as always. We'll see you later next time. Bye.